Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter for boxing-related tweets, or you can subscribe to this channel for notifications whenever a new video is uploaded. I want to talk about Golovkin and Szeremeta and the performance in that fight. But for you to understand where this is coming from, I have to read a certain comment I left on Hatman's video, in fact. Now, you have to remember before I read this, that Hatman and I actually disagree slightly on the performance of Anthony Joshua against Kubrat Pulev. Hatman felt he was hesitant. I personally, watching the fight, I thought AJ was terrific. And I've disagreed with Hatman in the past on various things. I respect his views and knowledge immensely. But we've disagreed on various things. Like all people that know boxing will disagree on things. I personally disagree on things like the scoring of the first Wilder-Fury fight. I disagree with Hatman on the scoring of the second Canelo-Golovkin fight. So you can disagree with someone and still have massive respect for their views and their knowledge. Now, somebody accused him of being biased on a video where he was discussing objectivity in the post-fight of Pulev and AJ's stoppage of Pulev. And these are two comments that I left that I have to read. It was in conversation with someone, one after the other, that I have to read because it's related to what I'm about to say with my view on Gennadiy Golovkin. So somebody accused him of being a narcissist and believing that it's narcissistic for anyone believing that they can be genuinely objective. And therefore, that makes them even less objective than most. However, that's not true. Because objectivity, I wrote, is understanding that you also have bias, but you set it aside for your analysis. Hatman doesn't ride any individual fighter, and that analysis is objective. But we all have set views that we use as a litmus test to judge with, and that in itself is a bias. But there are levels to these things. Fanboys are incapable of recognizing their bias. They are also incapable of observing evidence, changing their minds, recognizing the strength of an opposing argument. And that doesn't apply to him. It's not narcissistic to recognize the limitations of those that attack your views. Now, at that point, the guy accused me of only backing Hatman because he shouted me out. Something that you guys have to understand is I've been shouting out Hatman's work for years. I've been talking about how much I rate his views and his knowledge for years. It's got nothing to do with him shouting me out now. At the end of the day, I was running this channel with 100 views per video on average. It would go up for more popular sort of fighters, but I'd have, say, 500 subscribers, roughly just over 100 views per video, with maybe 10 or 15 guys commenting consistently, hardcore fans. All of them, I value their opinions, all these guys that have been there from the beginning. And I was more than happy to be doing that, hence why I've been running the channel for so long with that limited amount of people. Of course, it's wonderful to have so many other people on board since Hatman shout-outs, and it's hugely flattering. But that's not my motivation. And then I went on to explain and clarify what I meant. And I said, my point is no one is completely objective because we all have existing biases. For instance, if you value a great jab, before you even see a fight between a boxer-puncher and a pressure fighter, you're already biased and leaning towards the kind of work the boxer-puncher will do, and vice versa if you like pressure fighters. However, there are levels of subjectivity. Recognizing that everyone has a little bit of bias in their views and doing their utmost to minimize that when analyzing is very different from engaging in cognitive dissonance and holding a position no matter what evidence is presented to you. All I'm saying is that it's not narcissistic to recognize that someone is engaging in cognitive dissonance. And so Hatman isn't biased or narcissistic. Now, the reason I'm reading you this is because I'm going to apply that critique to myself right now and tell you guys as a disclaimer, I'm a huge Gennadiy Golovkin fan. He's one of my favorite fighters of all time. So there is that existing bias of I do like a lot of the work he does. But I became a fan because I like that work. Not I'm looking for an excuse to rate him. So now I have to start rating him because I want him to, he's not a friend of mine. At the end of the day, I rate him because of the things I've seen. So you have to have that in mind when I'm telling you the analysis that I'm about to tell you. Before I go into that with Golovkin, a quick shout out to Szeremeta. Because that guy took a pounding and kept getting up. A Spartan level of heart. You know the phrase, go out on your shield? That comes from ancient Greece, from Sparta. When the 300 Spartans, the rest of Greece was away at the Olympic Games, or the rest of the army, the soldiers, the warriors, there were 300 Spartans left behind to defend the land. They were invaded by a Persian army believed to have been anywhere between 125,000 and 250,000. And what they did is they went to a small strait where it was like a bottleneck area on the way to Sparta. On the one hand, you had the sea. On the other hand, you had the mountain. And there was no way through, essentially. There was just no way for you to come through that and surround them and overcome them in that way. And in the end, they were betrayed by somebody who knew the terrain and took them around the back of the mountain so that they could come at them. But the phrase itself essentially came from this concept, this idea of if returning with your shield, you are victorious. When they would die, these soldiers, they would be carried on their coffins, almost on their shield, almost as though it was a coffin, a procession on their return home. It would be on the shoulders of two soldiers that were holding them, or on horses, and they would come back on their shields. And it's from that logic that you get this idea of coffins returning draped in flags and stuff like that. If there was an arrow in a soldier's back, it meant that he turned his back and sought to run away, and as a result was seen as a coward and wouldn't get a proper burial. And that's where that phrase comes from. Well, Szeremeta showed a Spartan level of heart. If boxing was a war, he returned on his shield. And you've got to give a guy like that a huge shout out. Never say die attitude, had numerous excuses not to get up, kept getting up, and it was the referee that pulled him out. Huge amounts of heart. And personally, I'd love to see him back in the ring. I'd love to see him back in the ring against Sulecki. That would be a lovely Polish clash between the two. I'm sure that will capture the imagination in Poland. That would be a really good fight, an interesting fight to watch. So yeah, good luck to the guy. I'm looking forward to seeing him again. Now let's get on to Golovkin. I've explained my bias already, but I'm trying to analyze without bias, and so I'm going to be very complimentary, but also very critical in some respects. With regards to the complimentary element, that jab is unbelievable. It was incredible once again. The best jab in the sport of boxing. It's certainly the most prolific from a statistical perspective. Even when Vladimir Klitschko and Paulie Malignaggi were still active, they were the top 3 most accurate jabbers in the sport at the time that they were fighting. But with Vladimir Klitschko, although it was a brilliant jab, as a heavyweight, you're fighting guys that perhaps are not very evasive, so it's an easier target to hit. With Paulie Malignaggi, it was a speed jab. It was very accurate. He was capable of sitting on the jab and hurting guys with the jab, pushing them back with the odd power jab, mixing up the speed of the jab, very, very varied. But when it's you're looking for speed and accuracy rather than power, it is easier to be accurate with it. Golovkin is thudding you with a powerful, accurate jab. It is an incredible weapon. Incredible weapon. And we saw it put to good use again. With that, he would vary it sometimes with lead power shots, and the variation of those power shots. That short uppercut was absolutely beautiful. The hook, which would come around the guard, bang on the ear, so accurate time and time again. The straight right hand, sometimes he would shape a straight right hand, look as though he was going to throw another straight right hand and loop it again. So there was a variation there. The left hooks to the body were wonderful, and he throws this combination, a typical Gennadiy Golovkin combination, where it's a right uppercut followed by a left hook to the body. And from a biomechanical perspective, it can be a pretty devastating combination. Ask Matthew Macklin. And the reason that is so devastating is because if you are ever going to watch, a guy who wants to, forget watching, practice it yourself. If you ever sparred or you ever fought or just want to practice it yourself, if you hunch your shoulders slightly and tense your abs, tense them just as someone's about to hit you in the belly. You don't have to do it hard if you've never boxed. Go and do it with a friend of yours, your brother, or whoever it might be. Your missus, I'm sure she'll jump at the chance to give you a little jab to the stomach. As that jab's about to land, tense your abs. It will create almost like a shield. Okay, it's almost like adding an extra element of protection to your internal organs. If you don't tense and you're just caught with a shot, you'll feel it a lot more. So that slight rotation of your back is the best way to create that shield. You just arch forward slightly as you clench. As you clench now, you'll feel that level of, curving slightly will magnify that level of protection. What happens with the uppercut, when it comes through, it will catch them and lean their head back. So that crouch you do, that slight curvature of the spine to maximize that level of protection, as your neck opens up, it stretches out your abs. So try it yourself and then lean your head back and lean back slightly. You'll see that it opens up your body. It stretches those abs. That provides less protection for the subsequent body shot. Biomechanically, it stretches you. It opens you out, which will enable the left hook to the body to have a greater impact. So it's not just a random combination. There's thought behind it. He is setting you up. I've spoken about the terrific head control that Gennadiy Golovkin uses. He's a master at it. Well, head control is not just about holding someone with your hands and manipulating their head in that way. I've spoken about how he does it with his own head. When he's clenched, his arms are held. He'll use his head on the bottom of your chin, tiptoe and pull out, tiptoe, drop and pull out. Creates slight space underneath the armpit that enables him to pull out. It's not just that. It can also be done with a punch. We've spoken about often he'll throw a high jab to pop your neck back to stop you from having the balance to come back inside. Well, it's also a form of head control when he lands that uppercut to open you up to then throw that left hook. It's beautiful stuff. On top of that, one of the things I've spoken about recently with Hughie Fury and his need, what he should have been doing a little bit more of against Mariusz Vac, which was a very good performance, is sometimes he'd land his combinations, he was fighting with intent, but then he'd reset and just sit in that pocket a little bit too long. While he was resetting, he was in that pocket, and it enabled Vac to throw something back. And I was saying I wanted to see him end combinations with a jab, which would enable him to get back out. Well, one of the things Gennadiy Golovkin's brilliant at doing is ending a combination with a jab. And that will keep, even if there's not much off on it, which you know there is with Golovkin, it's solid. But even if there wasn't, stepping out with that jab after you've thrown a combination keeps your opponent off balance, which means it's hard for him to throw something back to catch you with. It's really, really high level stuff, man. And as far as I'm concerned, he's the best middleweight of this generation. I don't care what judges said. I'm sorry. I saw the fight. I've analysed it. I know what I saw. And you know, they interviewed, Boxing Scene interviewed, I believe it was 80, but it might have been 65 or something. It was a high number in the high 2 digits. It wasn't 100, so it was 2 digits. I can't remember exactly how many. I'm sure one of you can, you know, the researchers out there, the experts out there will dig out this article somewhere. But Boxing Scene interviewed all the pundits, the former fighters, the reporters, all the so-called experts at ringside post Canelo Golovkin too. And they all, bar 2, not all bar 2, I can't remember the exact breakdown, but only 2 of them, this I remember for sure, 2 of them scored the fight to Canelo Alvarez. So the vast majority of people felt that he won both fights. And if that's the case, he could quite conceivably be undefeated to this day, in which case you'd still have him as pound for pound number 1, arguably. This guy is a wonderful, wonderful middleweight. And the things he does, a lot of people talk about his power. Power is the least of his attributes. Listen, he landed 56%, I believe, of his power shots today. And Szeremeta was pulled out by the referee. You're not taking 56% of David Lemieux's power shots at middleweight. You're not taking 56% of Deontay Wilder's body shots. So if Golovkin was all about power, he'd be I'm not saying he'd be failed as a middleweight, but he wouldn't be who he is. Because he's a very good puncher, for sure, solid. Gabriel Rosado spoke about the fact that every jab feels like a right hand. But he also said, and Gabriel Rosado's a warrior who speaks highly of Golovkin, so there's no hate there. He also said he's not a one-punch knockout artist. He breaks you down. And now how does he do that if he's just about power? It's all the other things that are so much more. Every shot he throws is solid, powerful, breaks you down. But when they tested him on that machine, there's this machine they test you on, which is not the be-all and end-all, because there is a difference between thudding power and snapping power. I've spoken about that in a video in the past, and that's, you know, I'll go into that in another video in the future. But when they measure the pounds of pressure that you produce when hitting this machine, Francis Ngannou, the MMA fighter, is the biggest puncher they've ever measured, the MMA heavyweight, the UFC heavyweight. Now, Gennadiy Golovkin, when they measured him on that, averages punches like a light heavyweight. Not like a big punching light heavyweight, but like a solid light heavyweight. That's 2 weight divisions above his category. But that would then mean if he did move up to light heavyweight, let's say he moved up 2 weight categories over the course of his career, he would still be a solid puncher, big puncher, but he wouldn't be a monstrous puncher. So it's not about, but believe me, he'd still destroy fighters. Kovalev used to speak, when Kovalev was in his prime, not the Kovalev that fought Canelo, he used to speak about what a machine Kovalev was after sparring him. And the way he was speaking was in awe of him, as though I struggled to handle this guy, and he's a middleweight. Okay, so the point I'm making here is that he's incredible because of the other things he does that are married with the solid power. It's not the power that makes him who he is. He did show some upper body movement in glimpses. I felt that was exaggerated. Gabe Rosado and Chris Algieri were very, very complimentary on the telecast, talking about, look at the new looks that he's added, that ability to roll. He's not Canelo when it comes to upper body movement. He did it a couple of times. He was still getting caught a little bit too much. Now, a lot of people talk about, they criticize his defense. There's a method to the madness when it comes to Golovkin. I've spoken about this in the past, because his footwork, not foot speed, his foot speed has declined. I've been saying this for a long time. But his footwork in terms of balance and positional sense to be able to ensure that he gets his next shot off is beautiful. And often what he'll do, he did this very well against Martin Murray. I almost called him Andy Murray. Martin Murray, is he'd slide across and show you his forehead. He doesn't leave much around except for the hardest part of the human skull, where the hairline is on the forehead. And he'd essentially invite you to throw a shot so he could throw with you. And he knows, because he's got terrific chin, and up here you're not really going to hurt anybody, because he's only giving you that area to hit. He's thinking, okay, you're going to pay the Pied Piper if you decide to throw with me right now. But I'm offering you this opportunity, and it's the only opportunity you're going to get at this split second, but you're going to eat a right hand in return, or you're going to eat a solid jab in return. So he's very smart about where he leaves himself open, but still, the best chin is the one that doesn't get hit. And it would be great if he could develop some upper body movement as well, while maintaining his position to return a shot. Okay, if he can work on that, that will add a new facet to his game. But I thought that was exaggerated a bit by the telecast. The one area where I felt, or two areas, I felt there was a little bit of a weakness. Number one is when he could have gone through the gears to get Szeremeta out of there, I didn't feel like he did. Now, that might have been because of a decline in foot speed, and he didn't really want to, he wasn't able to cut the ring off effectively enough to be able to then, he was always in a position to punch, so it's not like he needed to cut off the ring per se, but he could have upped it a bit more and destroyed him. I felt like he had gears to go into that he didn't go into. Is that because he's aged? Or is it because he just didn't need to go into those gears, and it wouldn't have helped him to get a guy out of there for 2 months, after 2 rounds, considering the last time he'd been in the ring was in October 2019. Okay, so there are questions you have to ask there. What led to that delay in getting this guy out of there? Another area that I thought was something you'd like to work on a little bit more. There were times when he was throwing the jab, and Szeremeta was having that jab, he was eating that jab and leaning away to his own right as he was eating that jab. Golovkin would then often throw a wide right hook. Now, this is something he always has done for a long time, rather than a short, straight, punching downwards trajectory of a punch. As he was doing that, sometimes you would see Szeremeta throw a looping left hook as he's moving back, and he would beat, because it would come on the inside of Golovkin's right hook, he would beat Golovkin to the punch, and he would land that left hook as he's falling back on a few occasions. Now, that movement, that retreat throwing hooks, is something that Crawford does terrifically, by the way. But do you know who else does that? Demetrius Andrade. So it'll be very interesting to see if Andrade would have success with that against Golovkin. We know he's rangy. We know he's awkward with his upper body movement. Would he be able to move back and throw that shot and catch Golovkin with it consistently and frustrate Golovkin, who may not move as quickly as he once did? That's a question you have to ask yourself. I'm not saying that would happen. I believe Golovkin stops Andrade. But I'm just trying to explain that you have to look for certain limitations, positional errors, things that you could capitalize on if you were a fighter. There's no point in you just talking about Golovkin like he's Superman. What happens if you were an analyst and Demetrius Andrade came to you and said, listen, I need to beat Golovkin. I want to hire you, the big Golovkin fan, to tell me how to beat this guy. Let's do some analysis. You got to find something. No man's perfect. What are you going to look for to say, right, this is an area where you could capitalize? That's one area, for instance. So he's not perfect. Nobody is. That's something that maybe he needs to work on a little bit. When he's throwing that combination, maybe look at tightening that shot if you're up against a guy like an Andrade. Close the range of the trajectory of that follow-up right hand. The other thing I would say about Golovkin as well is that, obviously, I felt that he was breathing a little bit heavily. Now, obviously, he's 38 years old. Is Father Time starting to catch up slightly? Abel Sanchez, who he fell out with in acrimonious circumstances following a pay dispute, has argued that if there was a third fight, Golovkin would get hurt against Canelo. What do you think? Let me know what you think. How does this Golovkin, because there's a lot of talk from people like Algieri and Gabriel Rosado about it looking like the Golovkin of old. But let me know what you think, because it's one thing to look like the Golovkin of old versus a guy who's not really at his level. He's got heart, but he's not at that level, compared to fighting someone like a Gennadiy, like a Canelo Alvarez. Let me know what you think, guys. What did you make of this performance? What strengths and weaknesses did you spot? Thanks for watching. God bless. Chat to you soon.